So we are live a little bit late there, tiny bit late.
Technical difficulties.
It's it's what happens when it's live. It's what happens when it's live. And so yeah, there's a little bit of weirdness. Camera looks a little jerky, but the wine is just fine. And and the people who are getting the audio, all that really matters is that the audio is good. So I think we can manage that. How are you, sir?
I am fantastic. How was your week?
It was it was good. Very busy, but that's better than the alternative. So
that's true.
Oh man, I needed that. I needed a drink after going through the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune here, and I have a feeling my mic is going to fall off this thing. So I will get it adjusted at some point. We are doing. This is the second episode of the Vin and Dave's Destination Unknown podcast. The first episode has gotten good reviews, so that's very good. Today we're talking about the holographic universe.
Yeah, so this is one of those topics that's just an incredible rabbit hole of logical thought. So this isn't going to be our only episode on holographic universe, the nature of reality. I expect this is something we're going to come back to pretty often because it's just too deep.
So I think, well, yeah, and I know that we're going to be jumping off into like a whole bunch of other stuff because there's so much attached to the holographic universe. But do you want to explain holographic universe while I fix my mic situation, or do you want me to do it? You want to start out? You want to lead out?
Yeah, because I think it's important to kind of set our context, right? So what are we going to be, I guess, kind of focusing on for this episode? And I think what we want to do is kind of give an introduction to what we actually mean by holographic universe. There are a lot of different lines of thought when it comes to, reality and what is reality? Is reality an illusion? Are we living in some kind of matrix-like, artificial reality? What is it, and how would we know if we were, right? And I think what we want to do, especially for this first episode, is just kind of talk about, our positions on, what our current line of thinking is on this, and kind of, look at the history. Like where did the idea start that we are actually not living in real reality, objective reality, but we're actually living in an illusion of reality?
So as far as I understand it, this has been talked about for thousands and thousands of years, and it's like the basis of the Gnostic belief, right? The Gnostics and Gnosticism, which I guess is kind of a branch of Christianity as it's known, but I guess that it came like before that, right? That's the idea. But the idea is that, or at least the Nag Hammadi writings that they found, the Gnostic writings, the idea was something, they were talking about something to the effect of, there are these entities that are not of our world, somehow not of our dimension, called archons, and they created a world like a prison, right, for people to be inside of, and that the goal, the spiritual enlightenment, the goal is to exit from out of this prison and exit from out of the body, and to evolve beyond that. And what's interesting is that, like, as we start to develop ourselves virtual worlds, I was thinking about this topic, and today I was thinking about it, and I was like, wow, there's a level of consciousness to like an NPC, like a non-player character in a video game, right?
Absolutely.
There's a layer of consciousness there.
Yeah.
You're running around Grand Theft Auto and like doing crazy stuff, or any of these games where they have like this low-level artificial intelligence. You start to wonder at what level are those non-player characters conscious? I think that they're certainly behaving, in terms of the rules of their behavior, they're certainly more advanced, some of them at least, than like the animals that we see around, than insects or things like that. Like, at what level do you create a non-player character that is conscious?
Yeah,
and go ahead and do this, because I really have to fix my mic.
Well, and that really goes into the definition of sentient life, right? How do you define sentience, and are we ever going to be able to create an artificial intelligence that replicates sentience or becomes sentient, right? Like the Commander Data from Star Trek. So where are we along, that timeline? And I think you're absolutely right. This concept started off a very, very long time ago. And in fact, we rewind the tapes, we're looking at, Plato's cave allegory, and that was 400 BC. The prisoners in the cave all believed that these shadows they were seeing on the wall represented reality. And it was only after one of them was freed from the cave did he understand that his previous reality was only an illusion, right? And so, throughout history, you have these great thinkers who are thinking along the lines of, I don't think what I'm actually experiencing is all of experience or even, in a lot of cases, real.
So, I think that's a you got to wonder, like, the brain in the jar situation.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So it's like, how would I? Because everything that I see, I'm not actually seeing anything. It's all what's happening inside my brain.
Exactly.
Right? Because while I may be experiencing the same world as, for instance, a fly, we know that I'm not seeing the same thing, or a dog, or a cat, or even you and I, because I'm red-green colorblind, right? So if I was to be given the eyes of someone who is not red-green colorblind, I probably would throw up. Like, the world would look, the colors would be completely different than anything. What I think is green may be purple. Like, I don't know.
But consider this. I mean, even identical twins who have exactly the same physical capabilities experience the world in vastly different ways. There is no objective experience of the world, and everyone's experience of the world is unique because you are trapped within your brain. You can only sense the world through your five senses. And there's no reality in a lot of modes of thinking. There's no reality beyond that.
Well, the Hindu, that belief system, or the Indian belief system that is called by the West Hinduism, the
Buddhism
word,
as well.
Buddhism as well. The world is Maya. It's said to be illusion, all illusion. Which, okay, so let's do this holographic universe. Maybe we could start with the scientific and work our way back. So as I understand the holograph theory and hypothesis, that it was basically spurred on, and you correct me if I get some things wrong here, basically spurred on by Stephen Hawking, who was talking about black holes and said, well, things go into black holes and then they can't escape. So you've got the matter, you've got the energy, but there's another part of it, and I think that this is really what the coolest part of the conversation about this whole thing is, and that is the information.
Yeah.
The information about, and what is it about? What is information? It's like the rules of a game, right? The rules of the game. You could set two people, have two people standing in front of each other, and depending on what the rules are going to be, they could be singing a duet together, they could be dancing ballet, they could be fighting MMA, they could be having a rap battle. There's a ton of different things, and you only know what actions they're taking by looking at, well, what are the rules that they're like operating under, right? So same thing with the laws of physics, right? So you've got these rules. So the idea is like, okay, we know matter can't be created or destroyed. Energy can't be created or destroyed. This creates a problem with it going into a black hole. But then you've got this problem with information. Mm-hmm. And so the idea was, refuting Hawking, was that actually what happens is the information can't be destroyed, and that somehow, and this is the part where it's a little bit above my pay grade, but the idea is that somehow right on the event horizon, the information like gets stored somehow in some sort of like a film, or like almost like a photo capture, something like that. Right. Is that the basic idea?
So, right. So if you take a look at the holographic principle as it relates to quantum physics and cosmology, what they're talking about is actually this concept that you're saying, where information falls into a black hole, what happens to it. And what Hawking found, and that other people have since basically confirmed, is that the volume is not dependent on the actual, internal volume of the thing. You actually calculate it based on the surface area. So the surface area of information, and this is what, they were talking about with projecting a hologram, off the edge of the event horizon or off the edge of the universe. The surface area actually becomes the only, information that's really required to describe the universe. And, so there is that part of it, which I think is very deep technically. There's a lot of math there, and there's a lot of thought that I think is good, to expend thought, looking at that kind of stuff. But I think quantum physics, in a lot of other ways, gives us more evidence that something very, very strange is going on in our universe, and it may not be a natural phenomenon, because the holographic principle of quantum mechanics is assumed to be an entirely natural phenomenon that is just part of the universe. There is the other line of thinking, which is, if we are actually living inside of a computer simulation, what would that actually look like from a scientific perspective? And there's been a lot of thought expended on that as well. And I think there are a lot of clues out there, to be perfectly honest.
So, this computer simulation thing, and as you can see, I've taken my whole mic off. I'm gonna. This is super pro style that I'm gonna fix I'm gonna mount it to a chair or something like that because it's not working on the table. The computer simulation idea trips me out just on the rational aspect of where you're okay. Over time, we know that we are creating more and more complex computer simulations.
Yes.
More and more complex. Given a long enough period of time, you would think that we would create computer simulations. I mean, because an AI, if it's conscious, it's got to be self-conscious, right? It's got to know that it's alive. But at that point, can't it just create other self-conscious things?
Yeah.
So over time, don't we recreate? There's a I believe is it Asimov? It's a short story about this kind of idea, very short story about this computer that's trying to answer some question like why are we here or whatever, and it just keeps running simulations of the entire universe of itself recursively.
Yep.
Why would we not hit that? That's why it's fascinating to me, this idea that we could be living in a simulation, and why to hear so many people it's one of those people who are the most scientifically grounded. It's crazy to hear them say, and the ones who poo-poo all of the other conspiracy theories, they're the ones who are oh no, yeah, we're definitely living in a computer simulation.
Yeah, it's incredible. Neil deGrasse Tyson, just recently heard him, advocating for the idea. Philip K. Dick back in 1977, flat out said, we're living in a computer programmed reality. He didn't make any bones about it. He was yep, that's exactly what's happening.
Well, now he had all these weird situations where he was predicting the future, not just in his stories, but but it's fixed now. Look at that. Bam. Yeah, not just in his stories. He was absolutely predicting the future all the time, and I guess it kind of drove him a little bit crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Drove him insane, that he was oh no, I'm writing things down and then these things will happen. But see, and this is where I think that the whole information thing comes in, because we don't talk enough about, or there is not enough of a conversation about, okay, matter and energy, fine. But information, see, we know information. I've got my phone here, which I have not been cutting back and forth between us very, very well. But I fixed my mic in the middle of the show, which is amazing.
Nice.
Yeah. So, we talk about matter and energy, but so I've got my cell phone here. There's software running on it.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, I'm getting notifications from Twitter, but Twitter is not on my phone. And you could break this phone down to the atoms. You would never find the software. Break it down to its component parts and keep breaking it down. You're never going to find the software. And this phone, the physical nature of the phone, like I could have all kinds of apps on here, or it could be factory. But did I change the actual like material being? I mean, I guess to a certain degree, I magnetically changed some things in the solid state drive or in the flash drive or the SIM card. But did I really change any of the atoms is the question.
No.
And so then that must mean that we are living in a world of where there is this other thing at play. Like, it's not the materialistic view that it's like, oh, it's just matter and energy somehow slammed together. It doesn't fit even how we just live in our world every single day. Like, there's got to be this other dimension of information. There has to be this other dimension. And so then if there's this dimension of information, the question is like, what is the causal, like, the information it's got to be non-local. That's the first thing, right? Because since we said, like, it has nothing to do with matter.
Well, I mean, unless you're including, like, the magnetic charges on the media that you're actually storing the information on, that kind of thing. So you're flipping.
So, I mean, but I'm trying to go, I mean, that's like, I'm saying I'm using the software example as like, as more of a conceptual idea, but we could take it even deeper. So like, okay, so you're saying the magnetic charges on the media, but those magnetic charges operate under certain physical laws.
Absolutely.
Certain laws of physics. Okay.
Yeah.
Those laws are like the rules I was saying, like,
totally.
Where do the laws come from?
Oh, well, so it's interesting that you should ask. So let's start a little. I know you want to start with future stuff. Let's
we
rewind.
Can go wherever. It's destination unknown, man. We can go wherever we want to go.
I have no idea where we're going. We have no map to this stuff. So if you look at the world as it existed long ago, okay, and you had smart people taking a look at the world and going, how do these things work, right? Then you had Isaac Newton come along, and Newtonian physics, Newtonian mechanics came out of his brain, right? Mm-hmm. Probably the greatest, intellectual achievement in humankind up to that point.
Okay.
And it stood the test of time. I mean, it was fantastically accurate at predicting all sorts of phenomena that we see in the macro world, mm-hmm. right? And then there was some, other people that came along and, did some other thinking, including, I did want to touch on this guy, George Berkeley, who created the theory of immaterialism. We can come back to him later. But anyway, he argued against Newton's doctrines and his work, and significantly influenced the later achievements of Mach and Einstein.
Okay.
So those guys built on the original thinking done by George Berkeley, and Einstein then came along with his theory of relativity, which again changed our understanding of how the world works. So we had, started off with Newtonian mechanics, everything was great. Einstein comes along and says, yeah, but what about all this other stuff? And we're still dealing with the macro world. We're still dealing with the big world, the planets, the stars, the apples on the trees, how those things interact, right? And around the same time, a lot of Einstein's contemporaries started saying, well, hey, this is all well and good and you're very smart, but what about the quantum world? What about the microscopic? What about things that are on the scale of atoms and smaller? Mm-hmm. And suddenly relativity didn't apply, right? And Newtonian mechanics didn't apply. So they needed a brand new science, a brand new math to describe the interactions that happen on the atomic and subatomic levels. And this was really the birth of quantum mechanics, quantum physics. And what they found relatively quickly was that there were a lot of problems with what they were finding, because what they were finding didn't really make sense. It was not intuitive. You could teach somebody the concepts of Newtonian mechanics in an afternoon. You could teach the concepts of, special relativity and general relativity, maybe in a week. Teach somebody, how things work, blah, blah, blah. Not super hard to grasp, but trying to teach somebody quantum physics is practically impossible, just because on the one hand, we have certain, well-known things that have come about, like the waveform and, things like that. And those are kind of accepted as the current paradigm. So quantum mechanics brought in this concept of interpretations.
Okay.
And this has never sat well with me.
Okay, go ahead.
So the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics is the one that is most currently accepted. There's also the many worlds interpretation that is kind of a challenger, but is less accepted. There are at least 20, 25 different interpretations of quantum mechanics that are viable contenders for what's quote unquote really happening in the world. Newtonian mechanics does not require any kind of interpretation. Neither does Einstein. But when you get into the quantum realm, things require not only really complicated and convoluted math, but also different interpretations of what it means and how it applies to the rest of the world. And a lot of quantum physicists will just tell you this does not apply. All we're doing is we're building models and making mathematical models that make predictions, and they're very, very accurate. And it's true. It does a phenomenal job in most cases at predicting outcomes and predicting probabilities. But when you press and you're like, well, yeah, but what does that mean?
Right. Right.
Then they're like, oh, nothing. Hand wave. Don't worry about that. We're not trying to describe the real world. We are just creating experiments, creating math, and describing the various things that we see. So in the real world, you're never going to have a laser beam interacting with a single atom of something. But that's where they go to test out their theories and test out their math. In the real world, we don't see that. We see light and lasers interacting with big bunches of atoms.
So which makes me like so this is always what's like, and maybe it's because of my many psychedelic experiences where I have there are a few, like the quantum entanglement.
Yeah.
That's always been one that has like that's always resonated with me. The idea that no matter how far apart in terms of space two quantum entangled particles are, they will react in the same manner. They're like they're like twins, right? So they're mirroring each other's actions, no matter how far apart they are. Which says that like at some core fundamental level, there is this layer of connection, and that's sort of this. That is the holographic principle. Now, as you get like out bigger and bigger and bigger, then you start to get this differentiation, right? To where, okay, we're at this level, we obviously can't experience with our body, with our limited, crude, hands and our brains, which our brains are, made of like much bigger things. It's a much bigger system. We can't see this level of connection, but it always has the fact that at these infinitesimal levels, that there are particles that we know can have some sort of weird connection to each other, right? Some sort of what do they call it? It's spooky
action at a distance.
Spooky action at a distance.
Yeah, that's what Einstein called it, because he didn't like it. He didn't like the idea that this could be possible. And Einstein didn't like a lot about what was going on with quantum mechanics, and he disagreed with the Copenhagen interpretation. He really, he had some good points. I mean, he legitimately made a lot of, serious objections to what was happening in the world of physics at the time. And some of them have, borne out, and some of them have been ignored, quite frankly. But, talking about entanglement specifically, I really think that entanglement, to me, when I hear about, two particles, and what they do is they create two particles, they bring two particles very close together, they make them interact in a specific way, and then they separate them, and then they do something to the first particle, and then they see the result in the second particle, no matter how far apart they are. To me, that indicates that we're not dealing with two particles, we're dealing with one particle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're just looking at two different views of one particle. There is some, you talk about 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, the fourth dimension of time. Quantum mechanics says there's 10 or 11 dimensions depending on which interpretation you're talking about.
What does that even mean? Like, how is that even useful?
How dare you ask that question? See, and that's what a physicist would say, right? Like, it's completely unscientific to ask that question. Nobody cares, what it means. We're just doing the math. And that's the problem, is a lot of this stuff does not have any real world application outside of, we have developed technology based on a lot of the math that was created, which is great, right? However, it doesn't go far enough to answer any real world questions. It's an interesting topic, and I really want to spend some more time really digging into my objections to quantum mechanics. I think
what is that thing?
Some kind of bug.
Things are flying. Things are flying into the room. All kinds of bugs.
We're being attacked.
Summer in New Hampshire. My first summer in New Hampshire. And you're almost out of wine. We may need another glass. The where was I want to? Oh, yes. So the thing with quantum entanglement is, if we have one, if as you're saying, which I tend to believe, that what we're really showing in the case of these quantum entanglement experiments is that we're not dealing with 2 particles, but we're dealing with 1 particle, then are we going to say that I know we'll probably do a show on the Big Bang, but are we going to say that this whole reality started out as basically a singularity? And if it did start out as a singularity, then doesn't that mean that every single particle, since it came from 1 particle, is actually in some way quantum entangled? Because wouldn't that need to be the case if any 1 particle has quantum entanglement? Wouldn't that necessarily mean that at the most base level, at that instant of creation, that everything was subject to quantum entanglement?
The problem is at the Big Bang, and I have 2 primary issues that I'll bring up here. The first is that despite telling us over and over and over that quantum mechanics does not describe anything in the real world and we should stop worrying about it and just do the math, then they go and try to describe in exacting detail exactly what happened during the first fractions of a fraction of a second after the Big Bang. And they're like, oh no, this really happened. And I'm like, but yet you just told us to ignore quantum mechanics when it comes to the real world. But yet you're going back and, talking about the Big Bang, which we have absolutely no way to prove except through the, cosmic background radiation, which could be or may not be actual evidence. But, when you're talking about the particles becoming entangled, we have not yet witnessed entangled energy, as far as I know. We're still talking about entangled particles, whether that is an actual photon, which could be particle, could be wave, or if we're talking about some slightly larger, different entangled. They have entangled other. They have entangled electrons, for example.
Mm-hmm. I thought that's mainly that it's almost always been electrons. I think. Right?
Electrons, photons. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I had thought that it was because I thought that it was something about spin.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that it was a spin thing that they were measuring. That it's this that they would go the same, or they would go. Maybe they would exactly mirror each other or something like that.
So they do spin and they also do color.
Okay.
Yep. So you have the weird quark stuff that happens. So yeah, I mean, and they've actually expanded the entanglement to include a 3rd particle. So they would take 2 particles, they would entangle them, they would separate them by a great distance, and then they would introduce another particle, which is supposed to entangle, the first particle again. But then there would be entanglement with the 3rd particle on the second particle.
See, that's weird.
That's totally weird, unless you're really talking about one original particle, right? So if you have just 1 particle, and we're seeing 2 versions of it,
right? Well, then it's
and then you're entangling.
Well, see, that to me, that's the holograph. To me, that's where when you talk about the holographic universe, that it's just like, oh, I'm just seeing like basically what it would be like on a Unix directory system. Like I'm just seeing a symlink, basically. Yeah. Like I'm just seeing a representation, or in Windows it would be called a shortcut, right? I'm just seeing a shortcut. But if matter can neither be created nor destroyed, but I'm witnessing two particles, so this one is obviously, it's got to have mass, it's taking up space. If this is not matter being created, see, this is the problem, because we've got double the mass now.
Well, we don't, because we took two particles and then entangled.
So we've got half the mass, is what you're saying.
No, we've got just the same two particles we always had.
Okay. So we took two separate particles. We entangled these particles.
Yep.
Pulled them back apart. They stay entangled.
Yep. They are now in sync.
But you're saying that we're really only seeing one particle, so then the two were never really two particles to begin with.
Right, because if we're talking about, if we look at the dual nature of matter, is it particle? Is it a wave? What is it exactly? And we don't know. We honestly don't know, because it behaves like both in different circumstances. And the weirdest part is that it behaves like one or the other given certain circumstances, but only when you measure it. And that's the other thing. You have to measure it. You have to observe it. And you could actually, and then they've done this recently, they set up an experiment where they would send an atom through a laser grid, basically.
Okay.
And what they would do is they would send the atom along the path, and once it had passed the point where the lasers were, then they would make the determination, a random determination, as to what, were they going to interfere? Were they going to create an interference pattern? Were they just going to let it pass? Whatever. And they would measure it, later.
Okay.
So really, if you're looking at a strictly linear time, the atom really wouldn't have any idea, the electron, the particle, whatever it was that they were using, wouldn't have any idea what it was supposed to do. So in your logical brain, you're thinking, well, it must have done something. Not according to quantum mechanics. According to quantum mechanics, it doesn't actually decide what path to have taken or how to have behaved until you actually do the measurement. So then once you do the measurement, what they found was that even though the random selection of how they were going to interfere or not interfere with the transmission of that particle, even though that occurred after the particle passed where it would have been interfered with, when they measured it, it always acted as if it had been interfered with. Or not interfered with. It was correct based on their random selection.
See, this right here is what tells, this is where like the consciousness argument comes in for me, right? This is where the whole information like this, because it's a demonstration. Like for me, that is a demonstration that consciousness itself is having an effect on things that are happening in the universe.
Yep.
But then the question becomes, what is consciousness, right? Because if you've changed to this degree, if you've changed it just by observing it, which is to give attention to it, to focus consciousness on this activity, that actually changes what happens in reality. But that's kind of a no-brainer to me, actually, because it's like, well, we change the world every day with our consciousness. Like, I'm living in a house.
True.
Right? That was like, it wouldn't exist were it not for the consciousness and the conscious effort of someone. But even at the most base level, so then the question becomes, like, what is consciousness?
Yeah.
What is and that's where I think this is that third. You've got matter, you've got energy, and then you've got this information thing. And I don't think anybody's talking about this. I've heard a few like esoteric people talk about this idea of information, but it's like, so for instance, so we've got the coding in our DNA, and there's rules that on all biological DNA, that it's like, okay, here are the rules, here is sort of the software, here is the layout. If your DNA is set up and sequenced in this particular way, then you will turn out, then you'll be a human. If it's this DNA, you'll be a banana. If it's this DNA, there are rules there.
Yeah.
So, but my question is, those rules, did those rules exist? Well, they would have had to existed before DNA was created, because DNA is following these rules.
Mm-hmm. Is it chicken or the egg? I mean,
how could it is the literal chicken or egg, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because how could rules for DNA exist before the first strand of DNA, but yet it's clear that they would have to?
Well, here's
almost
something...
like the rules of soccer have to exist before you could play the first soccer game.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. But here's the crazy thing, right? So Bernard de Espagnat, I don't know if I got his name right. Mm-hmm. He's French. He's a theoretical physicist, and he did a lot of work on the nature of reality. He wrote a paper called "The Quantum Theory and Reality" in 1979. Okay. And the quote that I want to share is, "The doctrine that the world is made up of objects whose existence is independent of human consciousness turns out to be in conflict with quantum mechanics and with facts established by experiment."
My guy. That's my guy.
Absolutely. So then the real brain crusher is, what happened before people? What happened before life?
If a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it.
Yeah. Did the universe even exist before there was someone there to look at it?
Does it exist now when I'm not looking at it?
No.
See, that's
proven.
Yeah.
And I'm clipping.
Yeah, I got you.
Has been proven that per quantum mechanics, which I think still has a lot of flaws, but that the universe requires measurement and observation. If you're not looking at it, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I don't know really how to even feel about that.
Well, I do.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
And it's in context of the computer simulation, right? So my take on this, and I know I may be skipping ahead a bit, but we can rewind and talk through it some more. But
go where you're going to go.
I want to make a connection between this and the crypto-terrestrials. And what I want to say is that as we talked about crypto-terrestrials last week, and as we kind of agreed that we thought they really weren't that advanced from ourselves, what if we're the crypto-terrestrials and we are living in a simulation created by ourselves maybe 1,000 years in the future? Because the ancestor simulation, right? Huge tool proposed by Nick Bostrom back in 2003. This is a legitimate, proposal that he made, that the universe that we live in may in fact be a computer simulation that really is just simulating how their ancestors lived, right? So let's say we get 1,000 years down the road and we have really screwed things up and we don't know really where it went wrong, right? So we decide that what we're going to do is we are going to recreate an environment where the AIs living within the environment feel like, okay, this is real life. This is what we're doing. And we're going to replay history. Not only are we going to replay history, we are going to enable an infinite variety of choices and outcomes. Then you end up with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, right? So there is a lot about this particular simulation that fits in with our current understanding of science, our current understanding of quantum mechanics.
Okay, hold on, though. Hold on. All
right, I got another big one for you after this.
Hold on. Because you can't just go there, because here's the problem.
Okay.
It's kind of like the going back in time and killing your grandfather.
Is it?
It is, because...
Which if you do it in Grand Theft Auto, it's okay.
Well, but it would necessarily mean, if we are in a simulation, and if we are sitting here talking about being in a simulation, And if this idea has been going through our history for a long period of time, that would necessarily mean that in order for us to be a viable simulation, that whoever is running the simulation must also believe that they are somehow inside of a simulation.
Potentially. Absolutely. And that's the thing.
It's Inception.
It is. But if you go back to, right. So the Avatamsaka Sutra. I am pronouncing that completely wrong.
Okay.
Anyway.
This is one of the Buddhist sutras? Is this what this is?
Yeah. And it describes a cosmos of infinite realms upon realms, mutually containing one another. We have the Russian nesting dolls of the universe.
Matryoshka of the universe Matryoshka.
Yeah. And, so like you said, I mean, if not only are maybe they're also living within a simulation, and maybe they are living within a simulation. If you want a really cool thing to take a look at, there's a video. You've heard of the game called Life, right?
Of course, yeah.
Computer simulation. Yeah. So there is a video of recreating life within life. And so if you search YouTube for life within life, they actually create a grid of the life actually happening, occurring, being active. And then as you zoom out and you zoom out and you zoom out, you actually see like another like higher level that's occurring in the macro, right? So you get the micro, and then you zoom out and you get the macro. And
so
it's exactly
basically like that. Like there's an entire game happening inside a single grid, and what happens inside that single grid
determines
is
the color.
then played out. So that determines the color, and that's played out. But that's really what's going on, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what's going on.
Yeah. I think it is. And to add on to the point about, could it be something related to cryptoterrestrials or to our future selves? What really gives me a lot of, cause to, ponder this is that quantum mechanics is not agreeing. It's right. It is making excellent predictions, but it is not at all intuitive, and it does not seem at all natural. What it seems like to me is that we have now exceeded the resolution of the game. So you know how you zoom in on a video game so far and it looks great, but then you get to a certain point and everything's pixelated, things really don't make sense. I think that's occurred here. Now, if we're talking about an intelligence millions of years beyond ours, they would have smoothed all that out. There wouldn't be glitches. But because I don't think it was an intelligence millions of years beyond ours, I think it was an intelligence maybe 1,000 years beyond ours, those glitches exist. And those, just like entanglement, for example, just like, all of the things that we're finding in the quantum realm that really don't make any sense. And you have to be paying attention to something in order for it to exist. Matter can travel two paths simultaneously. Things that, scientists are just like, hand wave, that's just the way it works. Why? Why does it work that way? Maybe it works that way because the simulation was never designed to handle that level of inspection.
Okay, now I see where you're going with this. Now I see where you're going. Yes, okay. So the idea is that it's like, imagine that we're in a... what is the movie? I just rewatched it recently. It's an old movie from the 90s. Kiefer Sutherland is in it. It's called Dark City.
Oh, okay. Cool.
It's called Dark City. And it's basically like this guy wakes up and he somehow doesn't have a lot of memory, but he walks out and he's like, it looks like he's committed a murder, but he doesn't have a memory, and he's going to try to refine this. But what's going on is there are these aliens that are on kind of like a giant, it's almost like an asteroid, spaceship, something like that. And they're trying to, it's the ancestor simulation, basically. Mm-hmm. They don't have emotion or empathy, or there's a soul. They don't have a soul. But they're able to recreate reality. And every day They sort of jumble people around to see how they to see how they react, right? Give people new memories, make you go to sleep and then you wake up and you're somebody completely new. And they can change the buildings, they can change all of this. And at the end, it's basically that this guy is trying to get to this place like Shell Beach. He feels like he has a memory of this place, Shell Beach, and he finally goes and it's just nothing, right? He like breaks through this. It's like a thing on the wall. It says Shell Beach, and he breaks through the wall, and then it's just like space.
Nice.
So I like this idea that like we've reached the end. It gives me it's giving me the willies a little bit.
Yeah, we peeked beneath the covers and the simulation's broken.
You know, the other part about this is that everything that we are experiencing could absolutely all be happening in an instant.
Sure.
Like, time is completely relative if we're talking about a simulation, right? Because you run the simulation at you could run it at million speed, and it's like you wouldn't even know that this bug had been reached until you had played it. So we may have 100,000 years worth of simulation left to still run that's running in just a second.
Mm-hmm.
But they wouldn't know that there was a bug. And we may just be like run number 5023.
We have no way to know.
And and somebody's going to be like, "Oh, that was buggy. Oh, they got to that point. Okay, let's fix that. Okay, let's make it go a little deeper. Run the simulation again. Boom, universe starts over."
So here's the thing, right? Like, it's awesome that you went just where we should go with this, which is the Big Bang, right? If you look at the first second of the universe goes from apparently a singularity, a tiny, infinitesimally small ball of energy, and inflates during the inflation epoch, right, to bazillions of times its size, violating all the laws, the physical laws that we know, way past the speed of light, and just poofs up into this giant universe, and then proceeds to age from there. Sounds like booting up a simulation to me, honestly. But beyond that, you were just talking about, okay, we ran the simulation, we didn't like that, let's change something. Depending on which interpretation of quantum mechanics you're talking about, there are anywhere from 19 to 25 constants that are built into the calculations to make the math work.
Well, speed of light is one of them, right?
Speed of light's one of them.
But speed of light is variable. We've talked about this, and you know what I mean?
And we're going to talk about it in the future, too.
Yeah.
The speed of light is only defined because it was defined.
Right.
Yeah. It was measured many times. A lot of variation in the measurements.
Yep.
And then the scientists just said, okay, we're just saying it's this. And we all agree that's what it is. The fine structure constant, comes out of nowhere, exists everywhere. It is just one of those numbers that exists in physics. There's no way to derive this number from, experimentally. It is just there.
That sounds to me like a hard-coded value.
It is. It is a hard-coded value in our simulation. There are 19 of them, at least.
This is a config file.
It is. These are the numbers that they change when they want to see how something different works out. Yeah. It's one of those concepts where, I look at this and I'm just like, the more we find out, the more we know, the less we know.
See, now what's interesting about this, so now let's jump back to the Gnostics.
Yeah.
Right? So now bring it full circle. Was that me? Yes.
I think it was.
God, what am I doing, dude? So here we have thousands of years ago, and carrying through, and who knows how old this is, a group of people, somehow, how did they get this knowledge? I don't know. But a group of people who are like, hey, there's this group, they've created this world that we're in, They created us. They created our bodies. There's this Lord Archon, the Demiurge. They actually said that that Yahweh of the Bible, which again, Genesis, that seems to me a description, the great architect, like this seems to me software architect, right? Software engineer. This seems to me that for a very, very long time, way before people were able to do software, there was some idea that we are a program running, and they're describing it in their own sort of vocabulary, but it is the vocabulary of software, clearly. That's fucking weird.
Yeah, but it's the best description of reality we have.
Unless our minds just simply happen to work that way, and software is some sort of a confirmation bias. So that it's like, if we're going to create thinking machines, they would necessarily have to be. The only way that we could make them think was the way that we think.
Well, we don't really understand other ways of thinking, right?
This is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So to say that these people were describing software is maybe more to say that software is a description of the way that human beings think.
True. So to add to that, right, let's bring in another concept to this conversation.
Let's do it.
All right. So I'm not sure if you've heard of Zheng Zhou. Zheng Zhou was an author, 300 BC, right? And he wrote something that people refer to as the butterfly dream.
Okay,
and
go ahead.
This is where he wonders, I dreamed I was a butterfly, and I'm wondering if I'm a man who dreamed of being a butterfly, or if I'm a butterfly dreaming of being a man.
Okay.
So which is the dream state? Which is the awake state? Let's, bring in pre-lucid dreams, lucid dreams. Let's talk about, all of the different states of mind.
So I was thinking about this the other day. Maybe it was like 2 days ago. What I love about doing this show now is that, like, through the week it allows me to have like these cool sort of like internal monologues about these sorts of things. How would I really know? Again, it's this dark city idea, right?
Yep.
How do I really know that I lived yesterday?
You don't. Because if you're living in a simulation, then your memories are simulated. Your experiences are simulated.
Exactly. The entire universe back behind.
Yeah.
Everything going back.
Yep.
Could be completely simulated.
Yeah, and this is a mistake that a lot of the like cosmologists and people that really study what came before, this is a mistake that they make. They say, well, it's impossible. You would have to have a simulation the size of the universe. No, you don't, because illusions can be created. The beams of light that you're measuring, the redshift from these stars, could originate much more locally. They would just be created to look like they originated from 100 million light years away. These are all things that happen inside of simulations. We're looking at literally the entire history of the Earth could be simulated to look as if it was factually, as old as it needed to be. There's a concept called last Thursdayism, which is, nothing existed before last Thursday.
Right.
And you can't prove that it did, and that's true. I mean, if you have an artificial world that is, exact in every detail, then the fake evidence would be evidence, and you'd have no way of telling, is this dinosaur bone from last Thursday, or is this dinosaur bone from 20 million years ago?
Yeah, this is very like, this is where I think the materialist worldview starts to, because it's really, at the end of the day, it really starts to become about faith.
Yes, there is as much faith in science as there is in religion.
This is something that I don't think that is addressed enough. Yep, there's enough wine going there. This is something that I don't think is addressed enough, is the idea that if we're going to be scientific, if we're going to really be rational, and if we're going to say that like it's not what is possible and probable, everything that we have discussed is absolutely possible and absolutely probable.
Sure. And it's more probable now than it used to be because of quantum mechanics. We're proving more and more of this stuff all the time, that we have quote unquote legitimate scientists who are actually saying that until something is observed, measured, it doesn't exist. Consciousness brings things into existence. That's paradigm changing. I mean, honest to God, like, why isn't this getting more press?
Because because it's a step too far. Because then you start stepping into the realm of the religious.
Sure.
And that's where they don't want to go. That's where they don't want to go.
Yeah.
It's to say that there is no objective reality then. Well, what's interesting is no, there is no objective reality at the level B where you push past. What we're doing is we're pushing past the code.
But I would say there's even the argument to be made that there's no objective reality in any sense, because the only tools you have are your senses, right? And anything else can be faked. Honestly.
Well, and so then there's the jump off into the dreams.
Yeah.
And the fact that one thing that's always tripped me out is light in dreams.
In what way?
Well, because there are no photons hitting your retina.
Yeah, there's also no people touching your skin. There's
That's right.
There's no chair you're sitting on. There's no lion chasing you. None of that actually exists.
There's
it
nothing.
Feels very
there's
real.
nothing. You're not hearing anything. Your auditory nerve.
No.
But you're not imagining either.
No, you're sensing it.
You're absolutely sensing it.
Yeah.
So then that really does bring up, but this has been an eternal human question. Is this the dream?
Mm-hmm.
Or when I go to sleep, is that the dream or is that reality?
Yeah.
And this is again from like, from psychedelic experiences to the idea of like the archetypes, the Jungian archetypes that travel through the how do we all have these things that keep popping up throughout history, these models, these archetypes, these ideas that keep popping up, that resonate with everybody, that are somehow, I mean, it's weird because like Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell, right, talking about the hero's journey, which it just simply works, right? So like you tell a story, if you want it to be enthralling, if you want it to capture your audience, you just tell the same story over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It's the reason why Marvel, when they finally figured out, oh, we should be doing movies, it's like it's the same story. You just change, like it's literally, you could do cut by shot by shot by shot by shot by shot by shot. Like the one that really gets me is if you take and what's crazy about this is that this is DC and Marvel. If you take and the reason why I know this is because I watched both of these on the plane to Hong Kong, one after the other, and I was like, oh, that's the same movie. Wonder Woman, Black Panther. Almost shot for shot. You just go boom, 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 boom. Now, the where they're at changes. The sort of theme of what they're doing changes. But like you watch it, boom, boom, you can lay it out against each other because you've got the hero's journey. Yeah. We can just keep, but that's Lord of the Rings. That's The Matrix. George Lucas said, there's a clip of him giving an award to Joseph Campbell, and he says, at this awards dinner, had to be the 80s. I was by judging by people's hair and the quality of the video, that he's like, had I wanted to, I had always wanted to write a space opera. Had I not found Hero with a Thousand Faces, I would still be trying to write that space opera. But he was just like, you just go boom, 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 boom.
Yep.
Follow this. Why should that work?
Well,
why should these archetypes be popping back up in every human consciousness?
A couple of reasons. But first, I want to add to the movie paradigm, I want to add music. Because
of course, yeah,
music is popular music is designed to be consumed in mass. It is the same formula over and over and over. Mm-hmm. As we were learning the other day, the same two guys have written 25 of the number one hits of the last 10 years. Not a coincidence, not a mistake. These guys have a formula. They repeat the formula with various artists. They write essentially the same song, the same message, the same musical hooks, and it hits the top of the charts every single time. These guys are guaranteed to give somebody a number one hit, so everybody wants to work with them. And, that's it. They figured out, what do we have to do? Just like the Hero with a Thousand Faces, it's like, it's the same thing. It's a formula, right? Mm-hmm. And if we create a quality product that follows that formula, we will get the viewers. We will have that resonance with the audience.
But this, the weird thing is that to me, see, music is a weird one. Music is weird because there's no. You think about like what would even be the evolutionary adaptation for not appreciation of music. There's the theories that I've heard have been that it's something about that there's like bird songs or whatever, that humans being imitators, that to have perfect pitch, particularly for men, because in singing and song and certainly musical skill is of the like shamanic in most of indigenous and traditional cultures, is something usually for men. It's in like of the priest or religious vein, and that it confers to be able to have perfect pitch, to be able to make the thing, to be able to sing and like the hair stands up, to be able to do this, perhaps gave some of our ancestors a mating advantage in that, oh, that's very attractive, that, oh, he could do this. And so then somehow wanting to pass this skill on, or the value of this skill was sort of passed on through cultures. But I'm not like, I don't think that explains the power of music.
Well, it doesn't.
Especially when you're talking about like sounds that don't exist in nature.
Sure.
As an electronic music artist and DJ, I've done that for many years. It's always tripped me out that it's like these sounds don't exist in nature, and yet somehow within our being, within our biology, these sounds that our ancestors could never have heard resonate with us. All you got to do is go to a major like electronic music festival where there's 100,000 people like going nuts to artificial sounds that have only really existed since the 80s.
Yeah, but think about it. It's not just the sound; it's the feel, because there's a tremendous bass line.
It's the entirety of the composition, right?
Right. So I get a lot of energy out of listening to music. I listen to a lot of different kinds of music.
Well, and you're a musician yourself.
And I'm a musician myself. And I do, I feel the chills. I feel the goosebumps, and I get the reaction. And I think for me, it's always been a very natural thing. I get moved by music. And I think a lot of people are this way. Some people don't have as much of a reaction as other people. But when you surround yourself, you go to what's his name? Tiesto?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
You go to one of his shows and you're surrounded by 20,000 people all bouncing up and down in unison, and the bass is thumping and you're feeling it.
It's crazy.
You're hearing it,
It's
right?
an experience, man.
But you're also feeling it in your chest, and you're just, it's like your whole body is just in sync with this vibration. So it is the vibration and the resonance that occurs that syncs everyone up, and then it just builds, and it's kind of exponential at that point.
It's interesting that you mentioned the vibration, because I went to school in DC, and at the time DC had like the rave scene. That was where it was at in the entire world. Basically, like, there was this flagship club called Buzz that then became Nation. It was at the Capitol Ballroom. It's like a giant rave every Friday, right? Biggest artists all came in. Open air drug market at the time too. This is mid 90s, right? So, but what was interesting is, of course you've got all the colleges there. Like, I went to Howard. You've got Georgetown, George Washington, Catholic, UDC, University of Maryland, College Park, right? People would come in. What was most interesting to see was the kids from Gallaudet, or Gallaudet, I guess it's pronounced. It's an all-deaf university.
Oh, interesting.
So they couldn't hear, but they would come to these parties, get really close to the speakers, and it was like they were completely, as you say, just with the vibration.
Mm-hmm.
They were literally feeling the music, because they had like the sound system, the speakers in the main room were like stacked probably 25 feet high. You know what I mean? These kids would sit inside of the sub bass. You know what I mean? Like, it was so interesting to see, and that's when I was like, oh, it's way deeper. Maybe we're not actually hearing this.
No, we're feeling it.
Maybe we're feeling it.
Yeah.
But yet again, nowhere in nature. So, that's where the science in this falls apart. Because you get like a Daniel Dennett or one of these evolutionary biologists who are like, oh, well, the reason why, chocolate tastes, or like strawberries taste sweet, is because for our ancestors that would have been a glucose hit. And because of that, well, that one you can get. But then it's like, well, okay, then explain music. Then explain what I just described.
Yeah.
Explain the DJ, because there's nowhere in our ancestral history where that would have existed, where there would have even been anything approximating that. I mean, maybe in indigenous cultures you've got drumming. Now, the shamanic, like where the word shaman comes from, is actually Siberia, right? And oh man, I'm not being very good about switching these cameras, but I'm like into this conversation. This is gonna be. I'm gonna have to figure this whole thing out with the cameras. Sorry, folks, but I'm just into it. Where the word shaman actually comes from is from the Siberian tribes, and their shamans exclusively would use the drum.
Mm-hmm.
And at a high, I think it's almost like at 200 BPM, right, of beating this drum, and that's how they would go on their like shamanic journey. Not with you would think with psychedelic substances, but no.
Well, no, but if you can sync up your heart rate with the drum beat, and then you can advance the drum beat and make it faster and faster and faster, and then suddenly your heart's beating 200 beats per minute.
No, your heart beating 200 beats per minute, you'd be dead.
No, you wouldn't. It is very fast, but I'm just saying that people in heightened states.
I think it's more something happening in your head.
Yeah.
Which to me again is perhaps it's us inside the simulation becoming self-aware that we're in a simulation. Like, all of these things, if we look at it from a standpoint of the simulation, it's like perhaps that explains these states, these things that don't seem to make sense. Perhaps we are throwing errors. Perhaps what that is us throwing errors. But then because you always come back And the most beneficial part about it, at least for me, is coming back and this world feels less real. It feels more plastic. And it's that sort of plasticity that tells me, or that gives me the confidence that I can manifest things that I want. It's almost like magical, right?
Yeah.
But it's only having that experience of like, oh, there's something so much more real than this real world. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And if you look at every self-help author / speaker over the past, 100 years, it's always been about, if you can dream it, you can be it. If you can imagine it, if you can visualize it, all the visualization lectures, and everything. It's like the whole thing starts in your mind. You don't become an Olympic athlete by sitting on your couch and eating potato chips. Mm-hmm. You become an Olympic athlete first by visualizing and believing that you can be an Olympic athlete. Then you do the work, then you achieve the goal. Every successful person that I'm aware of, has gone through this visualization to realization process.
See, but I think that there's something before that. And again, maybe it goes a little bit to the idea of faith, because it's like, why should I believe that that's going to work? The only way that I would believe that's going to work is if I somehow believe that I am living in a relatively plastic reality, right? Because it's what that is saying. What that is saying at its core is it's saying like, oh no, dude, like you are able, again, it's like you're able to do quantum entanglement, but at the macro scale. That's what the visualization is really, because what it's saying is create the hologram that you want, and then it's going to entangle to the world, and they're somehow going to match each other. So then the question becomes, when I do that visualization, what am I actually doing? Like, am I accessing some other part of the simulation? Am I accessing another simulation and bringing it in?
Mm-hmm. Or are you prefetching potential outcomes from an unlimited future, right? So if you are hardcore visualizing a specific path, and we are living in a simulation, that path is going to be prefetched in the browser, and you're going to get there faster, you're going to get there easier. I think that's definitely a possibility here.
So we're talking about I like that one. I like that idea. I've never really thought about it that way. So does that mean that I'm doing the programming in that case? Like,
absolutely, to some extent.
Is this not necessarily rewriting the code, but sort of creating that, like, if we're talking about software, like that I'm sort of, that there's maybe a queue of possibility. Like, there's a queue. I'm putting something in the queue, and I can decide, I'm given the opportunity to put something in the queue that I'm going to move forward and that I'm going to hit.
Yeah, like we're time bound. And the reason that we can do this is because we experience time in a one direction, right? The arrow of time has always been a puzzle of physics that they can't figure out. Why does time move in only one direction at the same speed all the time, right? All the time, movement of time. Anyway, right. So put it in a video game context, right? So you might know that in your video game, you're going to want to go a certain path or do a certain thing. And if within the construct of that video game, you had the ability to kind of select options that you're going to be doing, in the future, right?
Okay.
Like we do, right?
Okay.
So let's say you were playing a video game and you had like your immediate actions, you had your near future actions, and you had your far future actions, right? And you could define, like, within a a certain boundary, you could define each of those.
I feel like there are games that do that. I feel like there are games where you can sort of set out a path, right? You're going to go here, 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 here. Like you can set multiple, that you're going to make all these 4 moves.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Well, like, okay, so I play EVE Online occasionally. Haven't had much time lately, but
now, do they still deliver you like real money, or is that gone from the whole EVE Online?
The whole
thing?
real money thing is it's a bannable offense. I mean, if you are caught, trading real money for anything, But
that used to be that at one point was the promise of EVE Online, right?
What? No, real money has always been verboten.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. No, it was
okay.
Yeah, and the reason is because the game is unbelievably hard. Like It has the most incredible learning curve of any game still to this day. It's been around for like 15 years.
Yeah, it's been around a long time.
Yeah, and it is nearly impossible to learn, nearly impossible to play. Newbies, hate it. You cannot just. It's not like World of Warcraft where you just log in, you level up. It is not a part-time occupation. I've been playing for like 11 years. And it's really the only thing that I still find halfway interesting in the video game world.
Well, that sucks. I had the. Oh my god!
Fear not, we were not taken offline.
We were not.
The government.
Yeah, no, we were not. We were not. The laptop was plugged in to the laptop, but it was not plugged into power, and so we just ran out of power. That's what happens, I guess.
That's okay.
Where were we?
Well, for one thing, our cameras look better, so I'm excited about that.
I think that's because now we're actually plugged in and we're not running off battery. So, yeah, there's that. There's that. No, so okay, so where were we?
We were talking about video games, and
yes,
I was
go ahead.
giving you a story about EVE Online. So for me, the challenge of EVE, and the thing is, EVE. They've done an incredible thing with that game. What they have done is they have simulated a very real-world economy to the extent that they have economists who analyze the economy within the video game and produce reports every quarter. You can download these reports. They are actual, real economists doing real economic reports on EVE Online.
Now, how close to existing economies are the
EVE Online really is like the most libertarian economy in the world, because they don't have to deal with quote unquote real people. There's no government influence really. There are very, very few things that are seeded onto the market. Very few things, and resources are controlled by the environment. But pretty much, I'd say probably 95% of the things in the game, at least, are player created. You have to build your own stuff, or have someone build it for you, and you just pay them for it. But it's incredible the flow of resources, the flow of the in-game currency, just the battles that take place. It is still the record holder for the largest online battles that have ever taken place.
What's the how many people are we talking about participating in a battle?
Oh, we're talking several thousand people at one time on a single shard. This is not a sharded universe like World of Warcraft where you log onto a specific server and you play just
you're
with
playing
those
against
people.
Certain people. You're playing against everybody.
The whole universe. Or if you're in EVE Online, you're in EVE Online. There is no separate anything. It is one universe, and if you're logging in because there's been a battle going on for 9 hours,
oh my God.
And it's for control of specific territory, it's something where you can legitimately spend days, weeks, months, years. I mean, this is something that does take over people's lives, quite honestly, because the simulation is so difficult. It is very reminiscent of real life. And that's the thing about real life, is it's hard. It is not easy. There's no easy way out most of the time. In real life, there are real consequences. In EVE Online, there are also you lose your stuff, you lose your stuff. There's no respawning back at, whatever. You lose, you die. If you don't have an up-to-date clone, which you pay for, then, you lose out. I mean, you're just done.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a hard game with hard consequences. And that's why it has a very small but incredibly loyal fan base who just loves this game. Like I said, I've been playing for 11 years. I'm not super active as far as, I like to log in and do fun stuff that I think is fun. They'll come out with some new expansion or some new release, and they introduce a bunch of, really difficult things. And a lot of people make fun of it, saying it's spreadsheets in space, which to a large extent it is. I personally have several spreadsheets that I use to play the game.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, the analysis that it takes and the thought that it takes to figure out, the puzzles and the variables and the way to make things happen in the way that you want it to, it takes a tremendous amount of effort. And most people are not willing to put that kind of effort into a game.
Well, that kind of, most people are not willing to put in the effort into the game of life, right?
Correct.
I think it's pretty interesting. I very much do look at life as a game.
Sure.
Right. Maybe sometimes I feel bad about it, right? Sometimes I feel a little guilty.
It depends on your definition of game, though.
Well, I mean, I see that there are these sorts of, clearly, right? Like, if within, again, going back to biology, right? Human beings would not be able to create something like EVE Online if within the human experience, every single thing that is taking place in EVE or any other game wasn't taking place. Like, there is no chess unless there is, it's a reflection of some human experience. Like, every game that we have. So for instance, you could say like American football is very much a simulated war.
Sure.
Right?
With very specific rules.
Very specific rules, specific roles for people to take on, just as you would in a military campaign. You're trying to take, we're in enemy territory. Like, it's literally the long bomb.
Yep.
Right? Like, you use even war metaphors when you're discussing this game, right? This is, if human beings wouldn't have already had and naturally evolved this experience that is war, it's almost like we couldn't have created that game.
It's interesting. And how would we go about creating something entirely new?
Couldn't.
We couldn't. But could we create something that could? And two examples come to mind.
That's it. Continue with this, because I think that this might be why we are in the simulation. Keep going.
Okay.
I love this.
So the first example that comes to mind is there was a experiment. I can't remember. I think it was Google or Facebook. Somebody, they had created these two independent AIs, and the two AIs ended up communicating, creating their own language that was indecipherable to humans.
Right.
We didn't know what they were talking about, so we shut them down. Right. Smart move.
Right.
But we created something that then created something on its own that we couldn't understand.
Right.
The second example is that we are currently growing Neanderthal brains.
What is this?
Did you know about this?
No.
Yeah. So there is an experiment currently ongoing where we are growing mini brains in the style of Neanderthal. We have Basically,
like organic brains, or
organic.
these are
No,
computer
these
simulations?
nope. These are absolutely organic brains.
Okay.
They are miniature. They're small in size.
Okay.
The intent is to determine if the Neanderthal species was actually subject to autism, Asperger's syndrome, different neurological. So they're not building the entire brain. They're building small miniature versions, organic versions, completely organic versions, where they can do some testing. They can determine, like, okay, like, what were their brains like? It's incredibly interesting, but also dangerous, right? Like, if we go beyond the mini brain and we go into the full-size brain, have we created a person? Or if we then shut down this experiment, are we killing somebody?
Right.
There's a lot of ethical questions that arise.
Right. Yeah, that's... I mean, I almost wonder if... I guess we assume that... or the assumption that we've been making, at least in this conversation, is that whoever is running the simulation is in a way more advanced than we are. But what if that's not the reason for the simulation? What if that's not the telos of the simulation?
Okay.
The raison d'etre of the whole thing, the reason that it exists.
Sure.
What if the reason that it exists is for us to create something new?
Yeah, that's entirely possible. And that may be another supporting reason for why there is a limit to the resolution of the simulation. It's not...
Because we're not really supposed to go... What it is that we're supposed to do is not on that level.
Right.
It's not... It has... Don't go there, guys.
Yeah.
There's nothing there for you.
It's like, hey, we gave you the rules that govern space. Go explore space. Go out there and do that. Right? We got relativity. We understand how that works. They gave us a speed limit.
Does the quantum stuff help us explore space at all, or no?
Well, only through the application of creating
like wormholes or things like that?
No, computers. It really,
Okay.
So computer chips, the whole silicon chip thing came out of the study of quantum mechanics. Superconductors, there are a lot of the different things that are being done with storage on a very small scale, so that way we can pack more data into a smaller space. A lot of that relies on quantum interaction. So, there are benefits. It's much like, the space program created the microwave oven, that kind of thing, or, Velcro. So yes, there are benefits that come from that line of research. However, it really seems to me like our physical world, our macro world, is very well simulated, very well designed, and we also have a good understanding of how things beyond our immediate planet seem to work. Maybe that was the intent of the simulation, to see how soon we would leave the planet, how far we would go, where we would establish colonies. Maybe that's the point, and that's why they didn't need the resolution to go all the way down to the quantum level.
I mean, I like the idea that perhaps the entire point is, like, I'm imagining a civilization that got to a point where maybe they destroyed the planet.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe
they never left.
Maybe they never left, right? And there's just not enough human brains. Right? There's not enough human brains to get to the point where they where they become an intergalactic species.
Right.
And so they're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We have these, oh God, I could totally see this, right? It's like you imagine a civilization, but the problem is I think that we're taking ourselves to this civilization because you almost kind of just described it, right? Like, I really do believe that very realistic virtual reality is on the horizon. Mm-hmm. And I believe that the introduction of very realistic virtual reality is essentially going to be a holocaust.
Absolutely. Because so this brings me to, another thing about the world that drives me crazy. You ever take your kid to McDonald's?
Yeah, sure.
And it blows their mind, right? Like the first few times, they're just blown away because they've never tasted anything like this. That's on purpose. Those foods are engineered. They're not grown, so to speak. They are engineered. The recipes are put together specifically to create an intense reaction.
Taste, yeah.
Well, absolutely. But it's not just taste. I mean, you could bite into an apple and, oh, this tastes pretty good. You bite into a freaking fresh French fry and your mind goes...
Well, those French fries are like... They've got like weird beef. No, it's a chemistry experiment.
It's a chemistry experiment. It is entirely. There are ingredients in there you do not want to know about.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's all intended to create that dopamine release, to create this almost addiction in your mind where you are craving this special food. And to me, you know, what we're going to do with virtual reality in the very near future is we're going to create these hyper-real experiences where people are unsatisfied with their normal day-to-day lives, but they go into the virtual world and suddenly, wow, I am an attractive person with great-looking girlfriend, and, you know, I can have all these great experiences.
Oh, no, way beyond that. Like, I'm the king of the universe.
Yeah, because resources are unlimited, power is unlimited. You could do literally anything you want. You could be any person that you wanted. You could go into that universe and be just, you know, you could be the new Hitler or something.
See, because we talk about, like, EVE Online, we talk about World of Warcraft. Those are bounded worlds.
Yeah.
But... what I think is going to be truly valuable in very realistic VR is unbounded custom worlds.
Correct.
Right? Where somebody, because that's where the real money is. Yeah. That it's like, look, see, so I'll tell you, and somebody can steal this if they want, but I thought that if I was going to, I've had this sort of screenplay rolling around in my head or like book idea, but here's the basic concept. The basic concept is story opens in sort of a fantasy world, right? There's this very powerful, almost demigod-like, like almost like a Hercules type figure that I this is how I imagine this almost Hercules type figure who's kind of a prince or a king of this world, but this world is fantastic. Everybody's beautiful. They fly around on eagles. He's got like kind of superpowers. The people all love him, but he's a wonderful person as well. He's like educated by like the most educated people and all of this. And the whole thing is that he's like he controls this world. He rules this world. But and he's immortal. He's immortal. And people live for a long, long time. But every 100 years, there's this special ceremony, and he has to go into the world of the gods. He goes and he does the ceremony, drinks this thing, goes into this cavern. There's all these priests and priestess around him. He's going to fall asleep, and he's going to go into the world of the gods. And although he is like a god among his people, and he's the ruler of his people, for a day, every 100 years, he has to go and be a servant to the gods. And so he goes and he falls asleep, and he wakes up, and he's in like a different kind of world, not magical, not mystical, but to him, oh, this must be the world of the gods. Oh, the rules are very different here, whatever. And he's got simple clothing, and he wakes up in this very simple room, and he comes out, and there's somebody that says, you've awoken. It's time for you to come and serve the gods. And so he goes, and he does his thing for the day, and then he goes back, and then he goes for another 100 years. But what's really happening is he's just a slave. He's waking up every day into this world.
Yep. And living 100 years.
And living 100 years while he sleeps as the king. And he's on a plantation of these people. And that when he goes and he interacts with these people, and they're like, oh yeah, let me tell you about my world. And he's like, because he's been told, oh yes, there are many kings of many worlds, and every king of every world has to go and one day, just one day out of every 100 years has to go and serve the gods. And so it's like, and this is the story. Copyright, and I see that.
Copyright 2018, Vin Armani.
But to me, because the way that this popped into my head is I said, How will they make unbounded, very realistic VR profitable? Because these people who are in this thing will be inoperable. They won't work. So how would they even be able to pay for it? This is how.
Sure. And, it's the same thing. Like, if the guy, instead of waking up and being a slave, if the guy woke up and was actually just an Intel employee who had designed this for himself, and,
Fair enough.
Yeah, and he woke up and did his day job, and then he went to sleep at night and spent 100 years in his reality. Time means nothing in a virtual reality.
No,
so,
exactly.
It's like you could literally do this to yourself. It's an incredible thought experiment to go through and just think,
Except it's not a thought experiment. Like, I think we're on the cusp of it.
Well, and from also the standpoint that we're proving it with science, it's not a thought experiment. We're proving we're in an illusion. We are living in a simulated reality. It's happening.
What a trip.
Well, it's like the quantum mechanics, quantum physics is incredibly, incredibly weird, and the people that study it the most, are the ones that say it's the weirdest, and that it is, absolutely counterintuitive. It does not describe, what they would expect to be the real world, the physical world, the world that we believe exists all the time, whether we look at it or not, is not the world of the quantum physicist. The quantum physicist knows that based on their calculations, based on the state of the art of the science, it doesn't. It's just not there. It is completely an illusion.
Yeah, that's... I don't know. My mind is blown right now.
Yeah. But they're just like, hey, it's just the math. Hey, the math works out. Or, pat us on the back because we did good math. What does it mean? Oh, no. We're not trying to make a statement about the meaning of the universe, but you are. You are actually saying that the world around us, that we perceive with our five senses, we are trapped, all of us, trapped inside our bodies, inside our brains. The only way we have to perceive the universe around us is through our senses. And you're telling us that it's not real, right? So what is reality, right? And how would we prove
Can't.
one way or the other?
Can't.
So Agrippa's trilemma.
Don't know this person.
Okay, so Agrippa, definitely go read some books from Agrippa.
Okay.
Unbelievable.
Okay.
Anyway, so Agrippa's trilemma. How is knowledge known to be true, right? How are facts established? How do we know anything's true?
Okay.
Right? So number one, you prove something through a circular argument in which the theory and the proof support each other, right? It's kind of like redefining the speed of light because you redefine the meter to be a function of the speed of light.
Yep. Okay.
Big old circle.
Yep.
Right? Okay. Number two, the regressive argument, right? In which each proof requires a further proof, which requires a further proof, which requires a third. So just an infinity of proofs built upon each other. Completely flawed. I mean, it's not realistic, right? Mm-hmm. The axiomatic argument is number three. An argument which rests on accepted precepts. So this one is tough for me, right? Because this one there is one table here. Do you agree that there is one table here?
I do.
Great. We have just established that there is one table here. Is there one table here? No idea.
No idea.
But we agreed that there's one table here. The problem that I have is that so much of our reality is defined based on consensus. We have a consensus view of what is real. We have no objective determination of any reality of any kind. All we can attempt to say is that what I'm experiencing is similar in some way to what you're experiencing.
Okay. Those are the end of how we can figure out what reality is?
No, those are the reasons we can't.
Those are the reasons we can't.
Yeah. I mean, every argument comes down to one of these three. Either it's a circular argument which relies on itself to prove itself,
It's
or
regressive.
it's regressive. It goes on forever, and there's no ultimate proof.
Or it's axiomatic.
Or everybody just agrees.
We just agree.
That's just the way it is. The speed of light is this. Okay. Boom, done. What other proof is there? There isn't. And
so then that
these aren't
basically
proof.
means that there is no proof.
There is no proof. And this is actually the fundamentals of skepticism. So, we describe ourselves as skeptics.
2 skeptics, 2 bottles of wine, 2 hours, too much weird shit for one conversation.
That is very correct.
Yes.
That is very correct.
Cheers to you, sir.
So, the ultimate, role of the skeptic is to not to disprove things. I think modern skeptics have it completely wrong.
The Michael Shermers of the world.
Oh, yeah. The guys out there saying, this is absolutely not true. Yeah. How do you know that? It's like, prove to me.
Just a hater, basically.
Yeah. Everybody, they're just haters.
Yeah.
Modern skepticism is haterism. Yeah. So the real skeptics are the ones they admit, I really don't know, right? Like, is it within the realm of possibility? Okay, I think we can agree on a lot of these things being in the realm of possibility.
Sure.
Are we going to step out and say X is true? Probably not.
No.
Are we going to say Y is false? Probably not. We are going to look at things, but with the mindset of how much of this can we actually, or can anyone actually prove? And when it comes right down to it, not much.
Not much, but it's a lot of fun to talk about. Well, I think I'm feeling like we're winding down. We had some technical difficulties, but what I will say is that is totally as in creating content, totally par for the course for the sophomore effort. The second time out is always the first time out is always like you always get beginner's luck, right? It's always like, oh, that's amazing. That's what keeps you going. The second time is always the wake up call. So great.
It's just like having kids.
There's a lot of second kids out there who just went, what? Wait, what?
Oh, they know. They know what I'm talking about.
Well, dude, I had a great time today, and we're closing in. I think I have some editing to do on this, but for the people watching, this one will be up on iTunes and Stitcher along with the first episode. I wanted to wait until we had 2, so that would make it good. With the podcast, it's good. We'll try. We may have enough resources to do Twitch and maybe some other things. We'll try. Yeah. We'll try and check it out.
And we may put up a Patreon site to...
we may very well do that. Yeah. If people want to sponsor our wine, we've been talking about wine sponsoring, so we may do that. Yeah. Should be good. All right, dude.
Cool.
Well, all right. Let's. I guess we're gonna say goodbye then.
Awesome.
All right. Good night, dude. Thank you.
Thanks.